And again, I would like to welcome you this evening to our Wisconsin Beef Special Edition with Dr. Doepfer, entitled Hairy Heel Wart, a threat for the health and production of cattle in beef operations. Tonight's program is being recorded. You will receive a link to the recording after we've finished polishing it up, because we need to add closed captioning to it before we let it go. I would like to welcome everyone who's helping to facilitate this meeting this evening. Amanda Kaufman, Bill Halfman, Carolyn Eady, Ryan Steary, and myself, Sandy Stitchin. Again, I would remind you to stay muted throughout the presentation. And at the end, we can ask those folks on the telephone to, at that point, unmute themselves and ask questions if they have them. This evening's session does qualify those who are certified in BQA with 1 BQA continuing education credit. Your attendance will be taken during the presentation, so please stay tuned when we ask you for that. Following this presentation, you will receive your BQA CE certificate by email from one of us at wisc.edu. Once you get it, you need to sign it and save it. And then the instructions for how to redeem it will be provided in that email. You cannot earn CE by watching the recordings of these sessions. So we hope to see you next on March 9th, 2021, 2 weeks from now, for pasture weed management with Dr. Mark Rentz. If you have not registered for that, we ask you to go to the same place where you registered for this one, the Farm Ready Research, and get yourself signed up. And I also want to remind you of our livestock topic hub, where you can find us and find the things that we're working on, different resources to help you in your operation, as well as take a look at the programs that we're working on. And with that, we have an opening poll that we're going to launch here with 2 questions.
All right, so as he said, we do have 2 poll questions this evening. The first question is, what type of operation are you involved with? It is multiple choice, so go ahead and put down if you are a cow-calf operator, a beef backgrounder or stocker, a feedlot finishing operation with beef, or a feedlot operation with dairy beef. And then we also have the other option. And then the second question is, what is your experience with hairy heel warts? Again, it's a multiple choice question and it is anonymous, so please fill that out to the best of your ability, so we can get a better understanding of who our audience is. And our options for that are experienced, as I had it in my herd; not familiar, I have not had it in my herd; familiar, I know some who had it in their herd; or I don't know anyone personally who had it in their herd. Another option is vaguely familiar, may have read something about it. And the final option is, I have not heard of this before tonight. So go ahead and get that filled out. And then we'll go ahead and move along with the presentation.
And I stopped sharing so that we can let Dr. Doepfer start to share, and we'll, if you want to do that, Dr. Doepfer, while Amanda maybe shares the poll results with us.
I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So primarily the individuals that are on tonight are beef cow-calf operators. And the majority of our audience are familiar and know of somebody who have had hairy heel warts in their herd. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Doepfer.
Thank you very much. I'm going to close the poll, right? Is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, just click it on your screen and it'll go away.
Alrighty. Then here we go. Good evening, everybody. And it is very nice that during these times of COVID, we are able to share at least a screen for a conversation later on, and for now for me to share with you some information about what I believe is true about preventing and controlling hairy heel warts, mortellaro disease, or digital dermatitis (DD) in beef cattle operations. My name is Doerte Doepfer, Doerte Doepfer as it's pronounced here very often. I'm an associate professor in the Food Animal Production Medicine group at the School of Veterinary Medicine at UW-Madison in Wisconsin. I saw some familiar names in the audience, so hello, and I know that you talked to Dr. Dan Thompson from Kansas State last time, and I will try to live up to his standards. I'm a veterinarian epidemiologist specialized in population health, particularly the infectious diseases that occur there. I've worked about digital dermatitis, DD, since my Masters of Science days back in 1990 is when it started. And like a first love, it never left my portfolio of activities. But today I work mostly with large data sets, population health consulting regarding infectious diseases. I love to teach my students quantitative data skills because I think in our modern times, we are flooded with a lot of information and we should have people who can be the messengers of information between these disciplines of applied epidemiology, herd consulting, infectious diseases, herd health, and so forth. You see a picture of myself here in the lower right-hand side corner. And yeah, without further ado, I'm going to give you an overview of what I want to do. I want to start from foot rot because most beef cattle producers and their herdswomen are more familiar with foot rot when it comes to infectious claw diseases, causes for lameness in their beef cattle operations, and then contrast that to DD or the hairy heel warts. I want to talk a lot about risk factors for DD. I have a separate presentation that I call checkpoints for prevention and control of DD. I want to talk about the origin as to where do beef cattle acquire DD, like how early in life do the feeder cattle actually acquire DD. And it's as early, they kind of are unloaded with chronic DD lesions that then infect entire pens later on. I want to talk about the course of DD, like how does it present itself to you. I want to emphasize that if you detect digital dermatitis, hairy heel warts based on severe lamenesses only, you are so far and way too late for having a chance of preventing and controlling DD that I think the efforts are almost, yeah, you shouldn't even engage in that. We have to focus our resources and prioritize prevention and control of digital dermatitis as early as the early season lesions. The lesions that are quarter size in diameter are worth your attention, because if you are able to postpone heavy outbreaks of lameness and the large scale lesions, if you are able to postpone that time point before the harvesting of the cattle, that's when you're gaining ground with regards to prevention and control of DD, and I'm going to try to explain why that is the case. But before we go ahead and go deeper into hairy heel warts, I want to show you some pictures and some of the gradations of foot rot. The pictures here on the lower right, these are pictures of foot rot in beef cattle. This is the symmetric swelling that is really, really hard, causes severe lameness with toe tipping. The onset is sudden, overnight, suddenly cattle develop lameness. And then within about 72 hours, it has been observed that the interdigital skin, that's the skin here between the claws, splits open. You see some exudation of pus and it stings pretty badly. Cattle are still very lame. There's some, during the healing process, there's some extra tissue, extra skin formation in an attempt of the claw to close this gap. And what you're left with are often the consequences of corns. And corns actually are very fibrous type of materials, and they are prone to develop digital dermatitis lesions as well. So how do we stage, how do we grade foot rot lesions? From the book Cattle Lameness that you can actually see online and buy online as well at Amazon.com, a stage number 1 would be that sudden onset of symmetrical swelling with acute lameness in the foot, in the lower foot, right above that coronary band, right above that border between skin and horn. This first stage is a sudden onset facilitated by bacteria and skin maceration, so any skin damage, and think about even a micro trauma to the skin in between the claws, that will facilitate the entry of bacteria into the deeper layers of tissue of those claws. And that's how we imagine that foot rot actually starts. Then within the 72 hours, we go to the stage number 2 with the rupture of that skin between the claws. You see necrosis, you see exudation of fluids. This goes along with a lot of pain and lameness, both of them. And then in stage 3, when the healing has set in, additional tissue, skin tissue and deeper tissues are actually formed. And this extra tissue formation is a predisposition for corns, later for axial wall fissures, because the horn formation around this closing lesion is not perfect. Heel horn erosion and complications that are the result of this healing process. So which bacteria are involved in foot rot? Like Helicobacterus, Fusobacteria, Truparella pyogenes in the later stages, the pus-forming bacteria. And they, through their different virulence factors and in synergy with each other, they actually they lower the immunodefense and the cellular defense of the host cattle, the patient, let's say. And this is how this exuberant inflammation goes ahead and causes the swelling and pain in foot rot. So grade 1 or stage 1 of foot rot is the sudden onset. Grade 2 is the splitting of the interdigital skin that you can see. Very often it's indicated here by the toes being set very far apart due to the swelling. And then you have the grade or stage 3 with the extra tissue formation, which we have seen in the picture before. I want to show you the gait of an animal that is at grade 2 for foot rot. And this steer exits the hospital area of a feed yard. Many of my pictures today result from my consults with feed yards. So here the left hind foot is affected. See how there's a lameness. So this steer can walk pretty well. And still, you should catch foot rot lesions when they are in the grade 1. So before the skin splits open, then it's a matter of a single shot of antibiotics, and this should go away. I hear a lot of the anecdotes where producers say, oh no, we wait until the interdigital skin splits open and we take that rag and we really clean it out vigorously. I don't believe in that. I think catching the lesions early, treating them promptly is your better priority when it comes to treating foot rot. That's my opinion. Oh, this is just wanting to repeat. And because if you let this go for too far, beyond grade 3, you get these septic arthritis cases. You get animals that are so severely lame that all you're left with is the possibility to humanely euthanize the animals. And in order to be humanely euthanizing in the field, what I would recommend is to please have, for example, an asset in terms of gating, where you can catch the animals here in one of the alleys in the walkways that have access by a truck or a vehicle. So then when you open this side gate, the animal has been euthanized and has collapsed, that you can open the side and you can drag the animal out of there. This would be a relatively cheap, inexpensive way for having assets for safely euthanizing animals. I remember ducking behind pickup trucks while my colleague veterinarian or herdsman was shooting animals in the pens, which for me as a European not so used to gunshots was quite an experience. So if you ask me, I would invest in this type of little gating to humanely euthanize animals that are in need of that. And having herdsmen and or people responsible for humane and up-to-date euthanasia protocols to be trained to do these tasks responsibly. Now I'm going to switch to digital dermatitis pictures. So this is not foot rot. DD is not foot rot. And the pictures that you're seeing here are actually DD pictures. So you see these big ulcerative lesions, these wounds at the skin horn border. They can be in the back, they can be in the front of the feet, they can be in the middle. Sometimes you see lesions that are here, up here, around the dew claws, but very often they are associated with the skin horn border. You see them with proliferations on top, these hairy filamentous overgrowth of the skin, the epithelium, or you see them as crater-like lesions where the tissue actually has been eaten away, has rotted away due to these severe lesions of called digital dermatitis. Actually, these lesions were first seen in 1972 by Carlo Maria Mortellaro, an Italian small animal surgeon around the area of Milan. And he came home in 1972 from a farm visit and told his supervisor, Dr. Cayley, that he saw these lesions. And this is how it was decided to call them Mortellaro's disease. Carlo Maria Mortellaro is still alive today. He is supposed to be retired, but he maintains his activities with regards to small animal and companion animal surgery. More pictures of lesions, and actually these lesions do not emerge overnight. This is something that slowly evolves and is a disease on its own. I'm going to explain like which bacteria are causally associated with DD a little later. But in contrast to foot rot, the lameness associated with DD does not emerge and does not develop overnight. That's a big difference between the two. On the other hand side, if you neglect DD for overly long, it can turn into foot rot. So there are the two combined. You see the symmetric swelling here on this lower foot, and that's due to the phlegmon, and that's part of the foot rot that is a consequence of this severe DD lesion here that has been neglected, and this cow has been lame for a long time before. So these lesions do not develop overnight, and here you see a beef steer actually. Here's the DD lesion, and this is the foot rot around them. So if you neglect DD for long enough, it can turn into foot rot with all the consequences of foot rot. And then there are the chronic, neglected, irreversible type of lesions, the so-called bumble feet or blocky claws. And the angle of the tip of the claw has been totally abraded. It's totally gone. These animals stand in their pens like statues. They tend to not move much. They lose weight. They are not doing well. And what you see sometimes is a manure encrusted, mud encrusted lesion. You see these overgrowths here in the middle, at where the former lesion used to be. If you put this in, if you use a microsection and put this under a microscope, these lesions look like tumors. So the hairy heel wart lesions with these severe proliferations, they actually are, under the microscope, they look like neoplasias, like tumors. And what they are keratinocytes, or skin cells that are totally out of control. They don't communicate with each other, they don't differentiate very well, and these are typical characteristics of tumors. So how does this start? If you look at lesions that are smaller in diameter, we call them M for Mortellaro, 1 for being in early stage, smaller than quarter size. It's just a tiny lesion, but this is the onset of digital dermatitis. Once they grow out into these quarter size lesions here, this surface is very painful. We call it M2, the classic ulceration of more than quarter size. And if you catch them in these two stages, if you were able to localize these or detect these animals, this is worth your time for topical treatment of digital dermatitis. And then if you go into the chronic consequences, the chronic sequelae of DD, you have to realize we group them into 7 groups. I'll show you the list later, and DD is for life. This condition here is irreversible. Whatever you do to this type of lesions with the proliferations or the crater-like tissue losses, you will not reverse this into a normal claw. If it gets to the point where you see the blocky claws and the abraded toe tips, there's not much you can do other than topical treatment to salvage them for prompt harvesting. And of course, that's not in your interest. You want to prevent this from happening. What are risk factors for DD? Well, bad hygiene. Remember, muddy and crowded pens, depending on the seasons in the Midwest of the US, that's commonly late summer to early fall. The mixing of cattle and cattle of different origin. It's amazing how my producers and herdsmen, they know that some sources of their cattle coming into feed yards, they never have problems with digital dermatitis, while others, particularly where the source cattle are being mixed on markets or in stock exchanges, at the auctions, that's what I mean to say, that's very often those are very often the groups of young feeder cattle that come onto into feed yards or backgrounders, and you will see outbreaks of digital dermatitis. Certain breeds, such as the Holstein crossbred cattle, they will develop more readily these lesions. And then there's this mysterious pen effect. Many producers tell me that in this pen they get outbreaks on a regular basis, and in other pens, never. And if you look closely, very often there's like a runoff that goes from pen to pen to pen. There is more to it than magic. There's usually a reason as to why these cattle are affected with high prevalences due to digital dermatitis. Digital dermatitis is not something that is reserved to the dirt yards. You see them on splattered floors, depending on the hygiene of these animals. So there's no real magic formula to saying this or that operation will never get DD outbreaks. And I want to show you a little bit more about the checkpoints for prevention and control of DD. For that purpose, I have to quickly go out of my presentation mode here and swap into a different presentation. I made this after several visits to different regions of the US to look at beef cattle with hairy heel warts. And the motivation for looking into checkpoints for prevention and control is, this motivation is, we have not even begun to estimate the economic losses due to DD in beef cattle. We have an idea, like we followed several cohorts and we estimated that on average, if a feed yard steer developed DD lesions, you lose on average $40 per head on that animal. And of course, this has to be corrected for the current meat prices and the days on feed, the feedstock prices. But if you take $40 per head times many thousands of animals that go through your operations, this is something you would rather avoid if you could. And in addition to the economic losses, I have to emphasize that DD is a huge well-being issue. DD is not something that is just a given and you have to learn to live with it. DD is something that you can prevent and control, and be it by delaying outbreaks with our current preventive and controlling measures. So where are our checkpoints for prevention and control? In the feed yard and in calf operations as well. I'll touch on that. The receiving area. So it starts with cattle being unloaded and going through alleyways, over bridges, and being guided into their respective pens, resting there for some time, coming into the receiving areas. There are areas where cattle cross paths. And if those path crossing areas are very muddy, are very heavy on organic matter, are very abrasive in terms of walking surfaces, if cattle are being herded across any surface really, so that they make abrupt breaks or make very short turns, this is where the micro trauma to the interdigital skin will have to happen. So around the processing areas, we have to look at foot bathing troughs and walking surfaces before and after in applying foot baths. We have to look into lesions for topical treatment. Which of these lesions are worth your time for topical treatment? It's not the chronic lesions with the big overgrowing proliferations, the tumor-like overgrowths. It's the early lesions that are worth your time for topical and prompt treatment. I want to talk more about foot bathing strategies, pen management, whether to use lime on a bedded pack or a dirt lot or not, and how much lime. The care for the mount or the scraping of the aprons in those pens. I want to talk about the walking surface briefly. I want you to think critically. Where do your cattle, whether that's cow-calf operation or feed yards or whichever cattle operation, where are your cattle crossing paths? And is there a way to drain these areas? Think about drinking troughs on cow-calf operations. There's a lot of mud around them. Is there a way to drain that area? Think about feed bunks where cattle come every day, several times per day. This is where they cross paths. So let me show you some pictures. Wait, it's not advancing. Come on. Can I do anything? It looks like my thing froze, which is not a good sign. Are you still there? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can still hear you.
It looks like my computer froze, so I will have to make a very hard restart here. I think this is the moment when we have to take a break, and I'll meet you in 5 minutes when my computer restarts.
That'll work.
Thank you. Sorry for this. It's never happened before. There's always a first time. But I will restart my computer, be right back in the meeting.
Yep, this is Murphy's Law.
I know, thank you.
So for those of you still with us, we are starting to get some chats in the chat box. Go ahead and put some questions in there as you think of them, as we will relay those back to Dr. Doepfer as she joins us.
So Sandy, as you're a veterinarian, what's your experience with digital dermatitis? Have you seen it a lot?
When I was actively practicing with dairy work, we were treating it before we knew what it was called. So yes, saw it a lot. Dr. Doepfer was talking about treating it earlier and having better success, and I'm pretty sure we were waiting too late to treat or waiting too late to be told there was a problem, because I remember trying to treat a lot of those chronic lesions that she was showing, where we were spending time trying to clean the area out and applying topical dressings and probably getting nowhere. So yeah, it's in the dairy world, it can be very nasty. Scott's asking me if I know of any breed differences in the susceptibility. And no, I don't know that. That's one of my questions for Dr. Doepfer when she rejoins us, because she mentioned that they see it more so in the Holstein crosses. And my question is that because they're a Holstein, or is it because they come from a Holstein facility? So hopefully Dr. Doepfer will be able to answer that when she comes back to us.
Well, as we're waiting, just looking at those pictures, there's snow outside my window, so it's hard to imagine a dirt lot or a muddy lot, but it will be here in no time. And just in general for foot health, this is probably some good reminders to get ready, as nice as it is for winter to end. That means we're going to have a few weeks of mud season coming up here.
After looking at those pictures, I don't think I'll look at another set of hooves the same way as I have before. So I think we'll all be maybe a little bit more diligent about observing what our cattle are looking like and how they're acting, and and kind of try to decrease some of that trauma to their hooves as we're moving them.
I'm also wondering, we should keep an eye out on our end. As Dr. Doepfer rejoins us, I think we may have to re-let her back in to the Zoom. So I'm pretty sure Erica's on. Erica can chime in on DD as well. We can put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm here. I guess I can fill you guys in a little bit on what I've done in the past. I've worked with Dr. Doepfer quite a bit on a dairy project that we worked on, I think in 2016, and we looked at 11,000 cows. I don't know how many hooves we looked at, but it was a lot of hooves. And we looked at a lot of, we were looking for the prevalence of DD in dairy herds. And I think Doerte will definitely talk about treating and managing that. It's probably a lot more of a management issue and a prevention issue more than hopefully treating.
Sandy, I'm back. This is Doerte.
Oh, good. Hello.
Sorry for the suspense.
No, it's great. We had Erica chiming in, Erica
Yeah.
Bierstrom.
So were there questions that we should address first?
Sure. So got a couple questions in the chat. One of those questions was, do you know if there are any breed differences, general and susceptibility to digital dermatitis?
Different susceptibility? Yes.
Between breeds, yeah.
Between breeds, yes. Actually, we know by now that there's a genetic predisposition to susceptibility or to digital dermatitis, particularly the chronic lesions. So yes, it's among the breeds, it's different. So the black and whites are more prone to developing DD, and all the crossbreeds or crossbred cattle from those black and white cattle. But then among the black and white, we know there's a genetic predisposition. And in the long run, we should basically separate those cattle based on PCR or based on genetic testing and focus our preventive and control measures according to that genetic predisposition. Yep. Breeders don't like to, or breeding associations don't like this message because it would could take away from the value of their animals, but it is a matter of fact that there are genetic predispositions.
Okay. And then the second question in the chat come in that, is there a higher risk of digital dermatitis with cattle housed on feedlots versus cattle that are out on pasture more?
So yes, in feed yards, it is known that the outbreaks are very systematic and heavy, and the awareness about these outbreaks of lameness being associated with heel warts is growing. I think by now it's very present in most of the feed yard operations. But in the cattle on pasture, this is where I want to emphasize that there are these areas where everybody crosses paths. If those areas have very abrasive type of walking surfaces, or if there is a lot of manure, organic matter, a lot of moisture, then you can expect that cattle who walk through these cross areas, and that includes auction halls and the areas around auction and stock, auction areas that where cattle are mixed. If they cross paths, think about the weighting scale in that auction hall. Every single head of cattle will go through that. This is where digital dermatitis is transmitted. And that includes pasture wherever cattle cross paths. Yeah.
Okay, those are the questions we have now. So I think go ahead and reshare your slides and we'll continue on.
You may want to enable me to share my screen because
Okay.
I'm not the co-host.
Need to make you co-host. Yeah. Sandy,
Sorry.
we do got to do that.
I'm going to rename.
Yeah, I couldn't find her on here.
back
DDVD,
into,
and I'm renaming into Doerte Doepfer right now. Sorry for this. If my computer does this again, we will have another break, and Erica has to jump in.
we'll keep our fingers crossed it works this time.
It has never happened, but there's always a first time.
Yeah, I jinxed you. Why can't I find you on this list?
Just one down, Sandy.
What? Sorry. I think everybody's list looks differently, actually. Sorry.
It's okay. Well, to get Sandy off the spot, as you're talking about the crossing, the patterns and commingling, do we know how long this might live in the soil or the environment?
Yes, if I take the treponemes, and those are corkscrew-shaped bacteria causally associated with digital dermatitis, among dozens of other bacteria, if I take them and expose them to oxygen, they die within half an hour. And same with UV light. But if I keep those treponemes in moisture, in soil, in manure, in skin, they survive for 3 months. Yeah, so they're very resilient as long as it's dark and there's no oxygen.
You are now a co-host.
Thank you. I will share my screen and back to my checkpoints. I'm going to go and do my talk about the abrasiveness of the surfaces that we make our cattle walk through, and this starts with the unloading from a truck into a feed yard. We are very much focused on having walking surfaces where the cattle don't slip. But at the same time, the profile of those walking surfaces sometimes have such sharp edges and such deep gradients that what happens is cattle walk across this not in a very orderly way, but if one claw catches or one claw steps onto the ridge and the other one hangs down, the consequence is an overstretching of that skin between the claws and micro trauma. Remember how this is the port of entry for bacteria? So slow unloading procedures and walking profiles that are less sharp and less edgy compared to this one would be important and would be worth considering in order to avoid bruising of the claws. From here, some cattle, actually young calves, they are unloaded and they have these bruised soles. They are extremely lame, not because there's an infectious claw disease going on, but just the mechanical bruising of those feet. They come from pastures or they come from very moist soils, are transported for long periods of time on metal floors in these trailers, and this can really harm and bruise the claws. I want to go to the next one, and sometimes these cattle are unloaded with lesions already, tiny calves of 300 pounds or so, 500 pounds. I'm going to show you what this looks like later. We have to train our eyes to recognize this as a chronic DD lesion and this actually as a quarter-size acute active ulcer of DD. And it's worth our time then upon unloading, considering having these calves foot baths already. Let me just up this here so that it's not in my way. Think about other checkpoints. Now in the feed yard, uneven footing, different consistency of floors, muddy and dry. If there's like this as a change between very dry and very moist soil, this actually has a problem, as it causes problems for the integrity of the interdigital skin. Think about these sand castles, I call them, that cattle build in mounds, and they love to lay down in those. These are breeding areas for microbes. So if you can, through your care of the mound or the areas that are very wet, if you can avoid those sand castles being built, this would be part of your prevention program against digital dermatitis and foot rot at the same time. In feed yards, you have these muddy areas, and particularly the lame cattle, they love to lay down in there. If you can avoid and if you can drain these mud holes, it would actually contribute to the prevention of hairy heel warts. And the same happens on pasture, particularly on slope pastures that have a lower edge that might be catching all the moisture. Think about monoslopes where there's a crowding of cattle, particularly during the very hot seasons. This is where manure and urine accumulate. This is where microbes actually are present in abundance. If you are able to dissolve these crowded areas or drain them, clean them better, scrape them, and I know I'm not making friends if I say this, but an effort and an awareness should be there that these monoslopes are actually risk factors for digital dermatitis. Then think about slatted floors and hygiene problems that can occur as soon as the manure is not going through the slats. Think about gravel on top of hard surfaces like concrete floors and the abrasiveness that is a consequence of that. So slatted floors combined with hygiene problems and a high stocking density are actually risk factors for DD to be avoided if you can. And I've been on operations where they were saying, well, DD is just something that happens, we have to live with it. But at the same time, there were defects in the concrete, big gaps where there were fractured legs going about. And if I see skid marks of cattle that are longer than 4 feet long, I know these cattle have big braking braking efforts. They make short turns, and these are all risk factors for digital dermatitis to occur, for infectious claw diseases to occur. If cattle have to tiptoe across these piled up manure ridges in a slatted barn, in a slatted floor, that's a heavy risk factor for DD because there is so much overstretching of that interdigital skin. You want to avoid that. If I see these alleyways that lead up to your shoot, to your processing area, totally banged up, that means again there's a lot of braking and short turns happening, and you should consider the stockmanship that is happening. Somebody is pushing those cattle, you know, as anxious as they are, heavily, and that's when you see these banged up walls. This is not only wear by age, there's a lot of wear here going on through a lot of heavy impacts on the sidewall. Think about areas where cattle cross paths. And if you think about the hospital receiving area, every single every single head of cattle, every single critter, as people say, will touch these woven tire mats. And then from the woven tire mats, they go through different types of surfaces to the outside world. If you had a possibility for disinfecting them or for substituting them by a square hole filled with sand, actually, this would cushion the impact of cattle jumping out of this squeeze chute and would avoid the cross-contamination of the feet of cattle on these woven tire mats. So I'm not against woven tire mats. I just want to raise your awareness about what the risk factor these things are. We are very focused on increasing the traction of cattle within the squeeze chute, and there must be a compromise between having ridges there that can actually bruise the soles of cattle's feet. You are all aware that sometimes cattle, in their anxiety, they start paddling in there, and I mean those are heavy moments of heavy bruising of the feet and overstretching of the interdigital skin. These are areas where transmission of DD occurs, in my opinion. We talked about heavy contamination, heavy soiling of the walking surfaces. I want to show you an extreme in terms of the profile that people use for having traction for cattle to walk on. If you use tractor tire type of mats, here the profiles are so high, the overstretching of the interdigital skin is a given. So if you have lots of foot rot and lots of digital dermatitis in operations where you see lots of tractor foot mats, I wouldn't be too surprised. And I'm pledging for a compromise in terms of having good traction, but not injury of those claws. There's a little bit of too much profiling going on. And then in the receiving area where cattle again cross paths, be prepared to be able to lift feet in a safe way so that you can have a good way for inspecting those feet, have an idea as to how to make records. So this can be a phone with a picture that is being taken, but it could be the DD Check app, which is a freely available iOS-based, it's only iOS, not Android, sorry, app that you can use to make records of DD lesions according to the M-stage system, M0, M1, M2, M3 if you choose to, M4 and 4.1. These chutes with proper gear to lift cows' feet can be used for topical treatments, and I'm going to return to that in a minute. We actually use cameras at floor height to score cows' feet or cattle feet as they enter or exit these processing areas. And we use artificial intelligence now to support herdsmen for the detection of DD. I'm going to show you a little video later. And I want to touch on what do the foot bath troughs look like in beef cattle operations, and this could be a cow-calf operation, but could be the feed yards just the same. Things to consider if you have walked through foot baths is the flooring before and after these foot baths, is the barrier between the flooring and the foot bath. You want to make it high enough for the cattle to kind of slow down and walk through the foot bath, unless it's one of these that lower slowly and then cattle walk out again. There's a rule of thumb over in New Zealand where they say per head of cattle that walks through, I can afford to have about a quart of fluid in my foot bath. Make sure that the flooring within the foot bath has sufficient traction so cattle don't slip, but is at the same time, you don't want that flooring to be abrasive. So this is me experimenting in that foot bath. And if I don't slip, then I think the cows are going to be all right. One anecdote about this particular foot bath here, that actually in contrast to the copper sulfate here, which is the green fluid on the left-hand side, on the right-hand, in the middle here, that used to be a foot bath using formalin. And you can see after a couple hundred of head of cattle going through that there's a sediment in here. And you have to be aware that formalin is a carcinogen, while copper sulfate in certain regions of North America or the world is a concern in terms of environmental contamination with heavy loads of copper ions. But the formalin here being a carcinogen, you don't want your young children digging out this sediment. So when I visited this operation and I saw that the 8- and 10-year-old sons of the producer were the ones entitled to the task of scraping this out. I mentioned the carcinogen, and from that day on, it was the grandfather who had to make the sediment go away. So the young people were happy, and it was a good conversation. So be aware these disinfectants are no goodies. You need personal protective equipment to handle the concentrates of these disinfectants. And one takeaway message here is, if you engage in using copper sulfate foot baths, you don't need extremely acid pHs for this copper sulfate foot bath to be effective. Actually, at room temperature, a pH of 3, 3.5 makes that more than 95% of that copper sulfate is in solution and unfolds its disinfectant functions. There's no need to acidify a copper sulfate to a pH of 1, 1.5, or 2, because if you have extremely acid or extremely pH foot baths, you are exacerbating the irritation of an already very highly inflamed skin ulcer, and you're making it worse. So we are if we have the wrong treatment and very caustic treatment agents, including the preventive disinfectants in the form of foot baths, if they are too caustic, too invasive, we will make our problem worse, and you will see an exacerbation of lameness, an increase in numbers of these proliferative tumor-like lesions. So having a well-designed foot bath, including the disinfectant, is critical to disinfecting these feet properly. I want to touch on checkpoints, checkpoints include the treatment, but here I will switch back to my original presentation because I want to show you more with regards to my reasoning as to why topical treatment, why foot baths. So here we are back in my original presentation. We talked about checkpoints, including some setup for the foot bath. I talked about treponemes, and those are so-called anaerobic bacteria causally associated with digital dermatitis. They hate oxygen. They die within 30 minutes once exposed to sunlight and exposed to oxygen. But there are hundreds of other microorganisms on top of the lesions, and it's always the treponemes that go deep into the skin as these ulcers unfold. And yeah, here you see them in the lower. These are these corkscrew-shaped treponemes. DD starts earlier than outbreaks of these M2 lesions, of these heavy ulcers, quarter-sized or larger. And I was called to this particular feed yard some years ago, I think in 2015. And there were more than 75% of these heifers lame due to digital dermatitis. And this was about 15 days before harvesting. It was just heartbreaking, heart-wrenching to see these beautiful animals suffering. And if you go with your eyes to the about that leg level, and you look through those legs as you see the light come through, you could see them do that tippy-toeing, that DD dance from from just being very much in pain. This is a well-being problem for the animals, but actually it is a worker safety issue as well, because the social knit and social structure of those groups of cattle is heavily disrupted by all these lame and painful cattle. If you think about the guard cows, the ones that guard the herd, they are three-legged lame. Think about the sheer forces that act upon the remaining 3 functional feet, if they're functional. So this guard cow is so in pain, she cannot do her job of guarding her herd, which makes her more alert, which might lead to casualties in terms of whoever is exposed to these animals. This goes, I mean, you all know the problem with blind or half-blinded cattle that have pink eye. Well, cattle in pain due to lameness, they can become very, very irritated and aggressive. So this is a worker safety issue at the same time as it is a well-being issue for the cattle. So what can you do with an animal that is extremely lame? Let me get rid of this sound here, there. Well, when they are in this stage, all you can do is treat these lesions topically to salvage this animal for harvesting. So you treat them today and you ship them tomorrow. And now look at what this guard cow there is doing when she turns around on 3 feet. She's going to turn in just a second. See how the grinding that is going on, the mechanical forces of shearing across that floor, it's a tremendous amount of force that will go into this. Come on, let me go. So what can you do in addition to preventing? Well, we found that we can significantly delay the spread of DD in beef cattle by means of a field trial that we did back in 2017, or we published it back in 2017. We used organic trace minerals by Zinfro, the DD formula or Vela Plus in our treatment group compared to a control group, and those were 3 pens each of about 150 cattle each. And what we would see in terms of before versus after, and there's about 6 weeks of time that go between the before versus after, we see that the number of acute active lesions and the chronic lesions, the M2s and M4s, actually go down here in the treated ones, while the control group was 2 times more at risk for having DD lesions 60 days after being 60 days on this control supplement compared to our treatment supplement. Yeah, so 2 times more, 2.5 times more almost compared to the treatment group. So there's a way to significantly delay these outbreaks, and we can make use of that delayed period by using properly constructed foot baths with a not too extreme pH. Another question that I'm asked frequently is, where in the world do my feed yard cattle, where do my calves actually acquire DD? And this is where my, my little video from 2003 actually comes into play. During a meeting together with an audience of about 100 people, this video was shown to show the abrasiveness of this metal bridge, which is like a cheese grater actually. And if you imagine these very soft feet walking across, oh no, not again. Are you still hearing me? I don't know what it is, but it's
I am still hearing you.
okay. I will have to restart again, but be prepared for a suspenseful video of little calves crossing that bridge, and suddenly there's a DD lesion, and no one in my audience saw that. This is how a left-handed girl from Germany gets an applause in the Midwest among all kinds of beef producers. So be prepared to school your eye to recognize these lesions. And I apologize for this happening. If I don't return, Sandy, then please look for my video into this scene. And then I wish you a pleasant streaming evening without me. Actually,
Which slide are you on at this point? What number?
I have no idea. Oh, 24 of 64 in my main presentation. I can see it on the screen. Thank you. So I'll be back, take a break, and I'll be back. I will have a hard startup, a hard stop again.
Okay.
This is very strange.
So hopefully everybody's bearing with us. You're coming up with some more questions.
Sandy, do we want to do any of the BQA stuff yet or not?
Oh, I suppose we could do that. Oh, she's back.
Oh.
Oops, that's me. Why is that showing?
I think it took a while for her to, or for Zoom to recognize that it was trying to get out.
Okay. I am not sure why I saw that. Carolyn brought up a very good point about we could do the BQA roll call at this point. So for those of you who want BQA, are you seeing this slide? We're asking you to go ahead in the chat box and please privately to one of the educators here, go ahead and type in your name as you want it spelled on your certificate and your email address. And we're asking that to put that to privately to an educator so that your information remains confidential, doesn't show up on the whole screen to everybody. So if you're a person now that wants the BQAC EU credit after this, go ahead and put that in the chat box. Okay, and I see some of you are coming through. And what's going to happen is you will get the certificate emailed to you after the presentation. And bear with us, it may take a week or so to get them to you, but we will get them to you. The instructions for how to redeem them will be provided in the email. We're going to ask you to sign and save that certificate. And then when you have 3 collected, you can send that to the Wisconsin Beef Council to renew your 3-year BQA certification at no extra cost to you. And again, you cannot earn, and yes, I see Dr. Doepfer's back, you cannot earn CE by watching the recordings of the sessions.
I want to hang on to those, send them in when you get a renewal notice, so not before that, correct?
Yes, Sandy, I'm back, and you will
Hi.
have to Find me again as DDVD, please, and allow me to share my screen. I deeply apologize that this is happening. I closed every other application now, so I only have one PowerPoint open.
Okay, I'm looking for you.
Okay, so I haven't changed my name yet.
No,
This is episode number 3 on Netflix for DD in a row. And I hope I'm not losing your interest. Nope, still not allowed to share.
now you should be able to now,
Okay, let's see.
except that I need to stop sharing what I'm doing to let you doing that. So now you should be able to, because I made you call. There you go.
Ready? Hello. Here I am. So we were at this slide. Thank you for bearing with me. I want to up this and go into presentation mode. So where do cattle acquire DD? Please train your eyes on that back side of these calves' feet, because at some point I'm gonna make you aware there's a white foot coming down and then there's a red foot coming down. And it's just a wink of an eye, but this is where we have to get our herdsmen, our producers, to be aware of what is happening. This is where we could position cameras that actually use artificial intelligence to automatically detect this, make treatment lists, make prevalences. There was one of our lesions that you saw before. So it's only like 30 cattle that are being unloaded in this 1 minute video clip. And I saw 6 lesions while this was going on. So you have to imagine this dark room with 100 people in the audience, and we were looking at the cheese grater. There was my lesion. It was just now. Yeah, did you see it? No, probably not. But again, we can train our eyes to do this and to recognize these lesions. 6 out of 30 feet here were actually affected. And this is the foot you should have seen. This is a chronic DD lesion, and this is another lesion about quarter size. This is acute active DD being unloaded from a truck in these tiny calves, and they have acquired this either at their backgrounders or their cow-calf operations already. And thank you to Dr. Tom Nossinger for sharing this video with me. I want to show you these early season lesions, so cattle arriving on a feed yard in, let's say, January, February, and by May, what you see is this. I want the sound to go away. Well, maybe with sound and then I can do it. Watch the far steer and see how the left rear leg actually has a slight. Can you hear me? Oh, this is me. Never mind. So I'm going to replay this. Watch the far steer and the left hind leg. See how the stride is just a little shorter? This is an early lesion of heel warts that is causing this. And then if you go into the late season lesions, same group of steers, but then in July, when they get to this stage, they're being bullied, they're being shoved away, they don't feed well, they don't behave like a normal steer would do. Look here, it's shoved, so this is not the best place for an animal to be. Now, the early lesions, if I look at those feet, this is all I see, this quarter size ulcer right here or right there. This type of lesion will cause that shortened stride. This type of lesion will on average cause an economic loss of about $40 per head. So this is much worse than we think. And probably the $40 per head due to these lesions is a cautious type of estimate. As I said, this is worth your time cleaning it up and treating it, for example, using a chelated copper gel, the quick hit gel. You use a water hose in the squeeze chutes in the receiving area to actually clean it, and then you can apply quick hit gel with a squeeze bottle to the back of the feet. And you let them go, hopefully for about 30 minutes onto a dry scraped surface. And I know the reality in feed yards is much different, but if you ask me, have them for 30 minutes on a dry, clean surface. This is when your topical treatment will work best. Other examples from the back of a squeeze chute for the early lesions. These are chronic lesions. This is late damage, think July after arriving in January. Prosolation, these hairy heel warts, crater-like lesions, big slashes at the skin horn border. These are late season M2 lesions, and probably the economic losses are much higher. I showed you this before, these statues that are standing stoically because cattle do not want to move with these lesions. So lifting a foot to treat DD, please be advised that you need to have the equipment to lift feet safely. You can use oxytetracyclines or tetracyclines in once prescribed by a veterinarian, so you need this veterinarian client patient relationship. The VFD is in order and it's in action, so there should never be any oxytetracycline swabbering around on these operations. So because this is off-label use of antimicrobial, and whatever you use, it could be a solution of chelated copper ions. Whatever you use, don't use extremely acid pH solutions to treat DD. So if you choose to wrap these lesions, then this is the foot with a lesion before cleaning it. This is afterwards, and here I'm holding a quarter against this lesion, so this is really quarter size. There's some hoof trimming that was done to have the overgrown heel horn move away from that lesion. I'm using a gauze sponge here, a 4x4 gauze sponge with the idea of a diaper. I opened the 2 layers, inserted half of it into the interdigital space. The rest is going to be used to cover that lesion. I use here a liquid form of tetracycline LA200 and don't use more than 2 grams per treatment, split over the different feet of that animal. So to add up to maximum of 2 grams, and for LA200 this would be about 10 ml that you squirt onto the lesion. Then you cover it with a wrap, either covered with the sponge, a gauze sponge first, then you use a wrap. And think again, less is more. So this is the idea of a bikini wrap, once through, once around. That's sufficient material that if you give it a little nick here in the front or to the side, it should fall off within about 1 to 2 days of time. Then this is a lesion before cleaning and after cleaning. Actually this one is after healing. And if I look on day 1, this is what the lesion looked like. This is after 14 days with 3 treatments. It looks pretty clean, but rest reassured that in these areas of more callous skin, there are zillions of treponemes buried into the surface or into the depth of that skin. Here you see a blocky claw being lifted. This is before cleaning. This is after cleaning. So there was seriously a lesion underneath there. Be careful with wraps. If wraps are used and pulled too tight, you see lesions that can actually kill those cattle because there's necrosis of the skin going around due to the pressure, which causes swelling, more necrosis, and in the end you have a big problem there. Be reminded, when you lift the cow's foot to treat DD, you're way too late. The treponemes have already penetrated deeply into the skin, epidermis and dermis, and DD has long-term consequences. It's not just that acute ulcer we are looking after. It is in the awareness that the dynamics of DD are driven by chronic DD lesions. Think about those tumor-like, those hairy heel warts, not the active wounds alone. And therefore we need an integrated prevention and control system for beef cattle that can start as early as calves. I'm often asked, like, is there a vaccine? There's no vaccine available against DD right now. What other tools do we have to look into lameness and preventing or detecting painful processes in claws? This is Dr. Shane from Pack in Nebraska demonstrating the use of a hoof tester. Actually, this is more for looking into bruised claws, and you apply them to the tip of the toe, to the medial claw here across, to the sides, to the lateral claw. So there's like a 1, 2, 3, 4-step movement of those clippers, of those of that type of forceps. And then there's hoof trimming. Hoof trimming is not really a concept that is applied a lot to beef cattle, whether that's cow-calf or the let's say later parts of the operation. But if you imagine there is an animal that is three-legged lame, and you take it into the chute, like right now, this is before the hoof trimming, and three-legged lame, highly painful. We took him into the chute. This is me in my disguise as a DVM with my left-handed hoof knife, and I relieved actually the pressure from the wall abscess in that left front foot. This was immediately after trimming, and the steer walked away and was moving quite straightforwardly. So with proper hoof trimming, if you know what you're looking for, actually you can help these animals tremendously. And that includes trimming away the heel horn that you want, that is pressing down on the lesions. Which other preventive and control strategies do we have? And before I start talking about foot baths again, be reminded, foot baths are not meant to control and treat DD. Foot baths are meant to prevent DD outbreaks. What we want to achieve is what I call the manageable state of disease, where everybody's aware that DD is present on the premises, but it's under control. And detection of DD based on lameness is way too late. Severe lameness, you have to be much earlier, so you have kind of have a surveillance system. And it matters what is used for topical treatment. So if you decide to use a foot bath, consider investing in a water clock to be sure that you have the amount of water in your foot bath that then later you use to dissolve your disinfectant in. I think it is not good worker safety to have highly concentrated formalin in this case being handled without gloves and a pair of goggles. So if you invest in a foot bath, make sure that worker safety is warranted at all times. Be sure that you have the regional regulations as to the use of copper sulfate and formalin in mind. So this might relate more to Europe, where copper sulfate and formalin are highly regulated. This is less so in North America. Antibiotic foot baths, to me, are totally out of the question. It's not good practice to use antibiotics in foot baths, so don't go there. When we do cultures of these foot baths at 0, 100, or 0, 50, 100, and so forth cattle passes, we find that after 70 animals, that foot bath fluid involving antimicrobials is already useless. So I would resort to alternatives in terms of foot bath disinfectants. There are more messages. Please be aware that these treponemes, these microbes associated with DD, they go deep into the skin and they hide there. So there's a race between the repairing mechanism of the skin and the invasion of the treponemes in between those cells that you could discover using microsections, cross-sections of the skin under the microscope, which is called histology. We need customized foot baths to the dynamics of disease outbreaks, and sometimes less can be more. We are in search of alternatives to very aggressive or highly concentrated foot bathing disinfectants. Less can be more, in the sense of, if we aggravate those lesions, we get more chronic lesions and more outbreaks. And then I get the stories of, well, these bacteria became resistant to the foot bathing agents. There are tools for making records of DD in beef cattle, and those tools, such as the DD Check app, help you getting a picture as to what is going on. There are chronic consequences of DD, and once cattle have DD, it's usually for life. And given the heritability of DD in particularly the black and white breeds and crossbreeds, DD is a destiny for some of these cattle because they will never get rid of it. So if you ask me about how to go about implementing a preventive strategy, identify the body weight of your cattle with maximum prevalence, which is usually around 60 to 100 days before harvesting in the feed yards. Then count back 60 to 90 days back in age, and that's where your prevention control strategy should start regarding foot baths, chute records during processing, DD pen walks. So being realistic, if you cannot foot bath every week or every month on a feed yard, which I understand, then make sure upon unloading cattle in the feed yard, you put them through a foot bath. After processing, foot bath. After first processing. It's the first implant. After the second implant, another foot bath. This to me today is the minimum for good practice with regards to using foot baths. Early detection of lesions, not due to lameness alone, but with a surveillance system, prompt topical treatment with a treatment agent that is not too caustic. We don't have to make it smoke and catch fire and stink for it to be efficient. We want to be aware of risk factors. Think about mixing cattle and bad leg hygiene, the crowding, the muddy areas, the draining. Think about the possibility of training someone to trim cow's feet in order to make the conformation of those claws better and turn them back. And reduce infectious pressure by, at every turn where cattle transition between pens, think about the thinning moments when you take some cattle out and or have others mixed together. This is when digital dermatitis transmission happens. This is not happening again. Here we go. Customized foot bathing, less can be more. We talked about the pH of 3 to 5, 5.5. Cattle skin normal pH is about 3.5 to 7 according to literature. This depends on the age, on the environment, on the season. And actually caustic chemicals used as disinfecting foot baths make the things worse because they irritate an already highly inflamed skin lesion. We're looking for alternatives such as 1% chlorine solutions in foot baths. And these alternatives work only to maintain the situation. They're not really useful for outbreaks after cattle have been treated topically. And think about leg hygiene. Again, my lab offers a service where if you wanted to decide how many cattle can go through a single filling of a foot bath, we send you a sampling kit and you sample your foot bath at 0, at 100, at 200, and so forth, cattle passes, and we advise you after culture of those samples as to how many cattle can safely go through. I talked about a standard protocol for hoof bathing frequency, once per week, if that's not possible, once per month, and otherwise after unloading, after first processing, second implant, those 3 times to me would be the minimum. 3% formalin is advisable, 2 to 5% copper sulfate, and have your pH above 3, 3.5. Think about the dimensions and design of your foot bath. Change after 300 cattle, if you ask me, without culturing. And this is when I see the eyeballs roll like, oh, academia. Well, if you ask me, after 300 cattle, that fluid is usually shot and you need to renew it. Otherwise, I advise you to have that culturing test at 0, 100, and so forth to get the advice. Monitoring for DD lesions using pen walks once per week to detect DD and 2 lesions early, treat them promptly, look into trends in the numbers of M2, and that is particularly relevant to the proliferative lesions. I'm not going to go into cattle types now. We have the possibility for pen walks. I'm going to show this to you. This is what we do in dairy cattle when they're feeding, but there's something similar possible for beef cattle. We herd an entire pen here into the back of a barn. And this is me, I'm the scorer, and there's another person here sitting on the fence, not due to irritation, but because he or she is going to identify the cattle using ear tags. And then we allow 3 to 5 cattle to come out of there. They walk towards this gate and show me the back of their feet for about 10 seconds. And you can train yourself or your herdsman to recognizing the lesions in this way. And I call out the lesions to my writer, and I could record this if I'm on my own. We can score in this way 140 cattle in about 45 minutes. So we were done with about 1,000 if you multiply 45 by 140. Here. And this is how we like to think about what the future looks like when it comes to recognizing lesions. You're looking here at a pen walk, and these yellow flashing boxes are actually lesions, M2 lesions being detected by a computer vision system. Let me play this again. Oh, here. This is pretty cool because we could now give a totally untrained herdsman, we could give them a system like this. And we have them portable by today using microcomputers. And I think the near future is going to be cell phones. And you could generate treatment lists, you could generate advice about foot baths, when to foot bath, if the prevalence of these M2 lesions actually goes up. Am I still in business? Yes. 7 groups of consequences due to chronic DD. Think about claw hygiene actually deteriorating as the pouch here in the back of the feet, of the skin on this chronic lesion gets deeper. This is a hygiene problem. Disruption of horn formation, and you see this in the form of this, these heel horn erosion layers. This is still reversible, so a good hoof trimmer could reverse this. Irreversible, it becomes once you have these blocky claws where the toe tips are totally abraded. Treponeme infected erosions other than in locations other than the coronary band. So think about wall abscesses that actually don't heal because they are invaded by those treponemes. In there you see these pre-mammary dermatitis cases, other sores. They actually harbor the same treponemes as you will see in digital dermatitis lesions, overgrowth of the ear horn. So that has consequences for weight bearing, causes wall abscesses, axial wall fissures, and so ulcers. And think about the microtrauma to the interdigital skin when cattle walk and brake and make small turns, short turns on very abrasive surfaces. Chronic DD seems to be highly inheritable, and that means that there's a chance for us focusing and prioritizing our preventive and control measures on those predisposed cattle, or in the long run to breed against DD and breed for resilience to DD. We need to detect and manage these subgroups of cattle. That means customized foot bathing, early detection, typing of cows, in the sense of there are animals that never get lesions, even in heavy outbreaks, and other lesions, cattle types 2, that have a single lesion and never again. And then there are the chronic ones that never really heal up. And long-term monitoring of trends, I think screening for this genetic predisposition will be in our repertoire for preventing and controlling DD. Why is this relevant? Well, if we look into the activity patterns of DD that we measured in when we attached for 10 days, the duration of 10 days, these activity meters, hobos here to one of the hind legs, and 18 of those hind legs were not affected by DD, and 20 of these hind legs had acute lesions, total of 38 steers. We found after those 10 days that actually there was a significant reduction in average daily gain. We saw that there was a significant increase in the duration of the standing time, an increase in the lying time duration, but on the other hand side, a decreased number of standing bouts. So how often cows, these cattle were registered to be standing, and a decreased amount of lying bouts. So this means once they had lesions, they tend to stand there and not move and not change position from standing to lying down and vice versa, if they could avoid it at all. So what does that mean at harvesting? If I have no digital dermatitis lesions compared to a single one, then I have a significant decrease in average daily gain, a significant decrease in live weight and hog carcass weight. And the same if I compare no DD lesion cattle compared to the repeat lesion cattle, there are significant changes, and this adds up to an average these $40 per head of cattle affected by DD. There's more. There are webinars, press releases for beef and dairy, folders, posters. There's a book, there's a DD Check app, there's computer vision models, there's a Claw Health Atlas that you can actually download free from the ICAR website. There are workshops, and there's me. You can reach me and find me under doepfer@wisc.edu, and you can find me on the Food Animal Production Medicine website at UW-Madison in Wisconsin. And now finally, I want to mention one more thing. You may have read or heard about a disease called Morgellons disease. And this can, among many other things, cause these ulcerative lesions in any part of the skin. And the human patients, this is not bovine, this is not cows, the human patients affected by Morgellons disease that is associated with chronic Lyme disease in humans caused by Borrelia burgdorferi. These ulcers if they are distributed all over the body, this can be highly painful and is really a life-changing condition. So this Morgellons disease has nothing to do with digital dermatitis in cows. Digital dermatitis, hairy heel warts, seem not to be zoonotic at all. It's not related to human disease, not related to Morgellons disease. And actually, if you talk about chronic Lyme disease, there is a group of medical doctors, human medical doctors, who say there is no such thing as chronic Lyme disease. This is a hygiene thing. This is a problem that sits between the ears and the brains of the human patients who imagine this happening. And then there's another group of medical doctors who recognize this is actually chronic Lyme disease does exist, and one of the manifestations could be Morgellons disease, just that you're aware that there is this debate going on as to, about the existence of chronic Lyme disease or not. With this, I want to thank you for your patience today. I hope that I've increased your awareness about digital dermatitis and about the fact that DD is here to stay. I thank all my collaborators, and the list is much longer by now. If a single person gives these talks, that's because many others have helped in the present and in the past. And I must say, one of my really dear experiences on my during my herd consultancies was with the Thomas family in Nebraska, when the kids allowed me to drive their quad. So for somebody from Germany, this is a big thing. Have a pleasant evening, and if there are more questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Sandy, the floor is yours.
We do have a few more questions. So the first one is, got a question here that they have a cow that turns up lame, and the veterinarian comes and they'll trim down the hoof until they find a pocket that has pus or a bad smell. And he opens that up, gives it an antibiotic shot, and then the animal recovers quickly. So the question is that digital dermatitis or is that foot rot?
So it's hard to have a diagnosis from far away, but what it sounds like, if there's pus involved, that's not typical for digital dermatitis or heel warts. That's more like the stage 3 foot rot is what it sounds like. But again, without seeing photographs, and you're welcome to send me a photograph and I'll be happy to look at it. But without seeing the lesion, it's I would say it sounds more like foot rot, stage 3.
Then another question is, when you had the slide up there where you were showing the treatment where you clean up the hoof, trim it up, then you put gauze and then the vet wrap over the top of the gauze. What were you putting under the gauze or soaking the gauze with that you put on that?
Yeah, so if you catch the lesions, the DD lesion at quarter size, and you have the possibility to lift the foot and clean it properly using a disposable paper towel or some form of cloth, then and you make sure that you clean that pouch at the exit of the interdigital space, then you insert that gauze sponge with the idea of the diaper. And we use quick hit gel, which is a chelated copper containing gel for topical treatment of these early lesions, or what you were seeing there is under the prescription of a veterinarian, being me at the time. I used 10 mLs of LA200, which adds up to a maximum of 2 grams of the oxytetracycline that is contained in there. I squirted it on top of that lesion. I opened the pouch actually, and I mean that little skinful at the exit of the interdigital skin, and made sure that my liquid treatment, topical treatment, would enter that pouch. Then I covered the lesion with my gauze sponge and I wrapped it with the vet wrap. That's what I used for that topical treatment, including a bikini wrap.
Okay, thank you. Got some more questions coming in now. Next question we have is, does hoof color, the color of the hoof of the horn itself, the white versus black, does that have any effect on susceptibility to hoof diseases?
Mm-hmm. So that question has been asked many times before, because there's a belief that the white hoofs are more susceptible to DD compared to the colored ones. I think it doesn't matter. If the risk factors accumulate, and that's the crowding, the muddiness, the hygiene, the breed, the season, then you will see DD in either colored cattle, whether the claw or the skin is bright or dark.
Okay, we've got another question here. Do you see digital dermatitis frequency at the same level in organic dairies as you do in conventional dairies?
Yes, I do see the same. You can see outbreaks in either one.
Okay, and we've got another question here. Talked about the fact that the rubber mats can serve as a kind of a sink for the bacteria. Those that are at the exits coming out of chutes, or perhaps maybe they've got a rubber mat at the bottom of the chute to help with traction rather than the bars. What disinfectants would you recommend to clean those or treat those rubber mat surfaces if they're in a situation where that's their best option for helping with traction on the way out?
I would use a device that has high pressure water, high water pressure. I think
Power washers.
a power washer. That's the word I'm using. Yes, I would use a power washer to clean it at first to get rid of all the organic matter, and then you could use a 1% chlorine solution for that. Some people they add lime to the surface of these mats. This is all a question of durability of the rubber mats, but those are possibilities.
Okay, we've got another question here. Getting back to that treatment of the hoof, is the liquid LA200 actually injected into the lesion or topically applied, or?
Topically applied under the supervision and upon the prescription of a veterinarian. It's not injected. We don't inject cattle to treat DD because we need to have the treatment agent interact with the surface of that wound. And we have about 30 minutes for that to happen. This is why some people opt for the wrap, others opt for treating topically and then releasing for 30 minutes onto a scraped, clean, dry surface. So no injection.
We got another question here. What about the use of topical iodine, like a heat dip type solution as a treatment? Is that option, or are there better options?
So iodines have been tested in controlled trials, like case control trials, iodine versus, let's say, a tetracycline treatment. And iodines are not very useful when it comes to killing or inhibiting treponines in vitro, like in the lab. And they show not much effect, not lasting effect at treating BD lesions topically. I would not recommend it.
Okay. Question, you had some pictures from some slat floor finishing barns. And have you looked at the incidence of digital dermatitis in those? A couple of different factors I'm curious about, I think, in some of the audience would be whether there were rubber mats or some kind of mat cap covering over the concrete. And then also, is there a time effect the longer the time the cattle are on the slats versus out in a different sort of a pen? Do you see that making any kind of impacting on the incidence of it?
So with regards to the rubber mats, I think rubber mats are a good idea as long as the manure goes through the slats and doesn't accumulate on top of them. So this depends on the urine, on the moisture that is in those pens, the stocking density, and so forth. So I think basically rubber mats are a good idea, but as soon as the manure does not go through the slats anymore, then it doesn't matter whether you have concrete or not. And I forgot the second question, second part of the question.
Second question was regarding the length of time that the cattle are out. So I guess let me back up. So you're saying that if we get excessive manure built up on the slats, that there's a management issue they need to address to work on getting that manure down through the slats.
Correct.
And then the second one is, the second component to that was we talk about the different time lengths that cattle are on slats versus not on slats. You know, in some cases, farmers will tell you they don't like to keep them on slats real long. And so they'll kind of background them or put them on a grower ration or maybe up to 700, 800, 900 pounds, 1,000 pounds, and they'll move them onto the slats for the last duration. You see a difference in the time that they're on slats?
No, as long as these risk factors do not accumulate, to me it doesn't matter what type of whether it's slats or not. But usually the heaviest outbreaks are about 60 to 100 days before harvesting. And if we are able to delay those outbreaks, then it works towards having outbreaks closer to the harvesting and cattle doing much better until that might happen. And it might not happen. So I don't think that slatted floors are a risk factor more than other flooring systems, to be honest. It depends on the hygiene and risk factor situation in the respective pens.
Okay. And then you showed, you had some information there that said, we need to look at when do the digital dermatitis start showing up in the feedlot, and kind of indicated that it was oftentimes it's 60 to 100 days before they would be marketed, and you indicated to back up another 60 to 90 days prior to that. So for some of the beef cattle, I mean, that could be, we better start watching them as soon as they arrive at the yard, because that's about all the longer they're going to be there.
Right.
Question is, for those cattle that are on feed for about 200 days, why does it not appear right away? And, why does it take that 60 to 90 days to start showing up in greater incidents where you're seeing the poor, the lameness and those kinds of things?
Mm-hmm. I think it's an awareness question. If you had somebody like me look at it, I see them upon unloading of the calves. And if your trigger or your threshold for calling it a problem is detecting it through severe lameness cases, then you will see it later. And what I'm trying to emphasize or focus on is there's somewhere in the middle where there are these early season lesions, the quarter-size lesions. And those are already worth your time in terms of topical treatment, because if you're able to control those, then you are delaying heavy outbreaks later. And that buys you time for them to maybe be even harvested before the outbreak happens.
So what it boils down to, it sounds like, is that we need to learn how to identify this much, much earlier than what we typically are doing.
Yes, and then come into action with properly designed foot baths that are not too aggressive, not too acid, having topical treatment protocols that are applied in a routine and safe way. And I think what is coming is that you will have decision aids in the form of these computer vision models that you can take on your pen walks, and then these systems will help you decide, okay, it's time for a foot bath or not.
And a lot of that's also going to be tied to keeping the feeding apron scraped and those kinds of things, so the feet are clean enough, you're going to be able to see these things.
Yes, absolutely. And it depends on the operation. I've done these pen walks from horseback as well, and imagine you could attach a camera with this computer vision system to the stirrups of a pen rider and have the diagnosis or the detection of DD lesions in this way. Or a trained pen rider can do 200 cattle feeding at the feed bunk in about 1 or 2 minutes. I have a video about that, but I had to choose my videos a little bit. So what I can offer is, during my visits to herds, is I help herdsmen train their eyes towards how to prioritize pens for example, foot baths or for treatments. And one key message I probably forgot to say that is, if you have the choice between different pens going through a foot bath, the tendency is for having the worst affected pen go first to the foot bath. What I emphasize when I train my herdsmen is say, no, have the cattle that are least affected go through the foot bath first, so that the foot bath fluid is not contaminated by the heavily affected cattle. And we prioritize the pens. We put them into an order of sequence depending on the prevalence of DD lesions that we find per pen.
Okay. Got a different dermatology question here. I don't know if you want to answer it or take a crack at it or not. I'll ask it. Individual says they've got a heifer that has quite a good sized wart on her neck, and they're wondering what would be a recommendation for dealing with that. So it's about as far away from the feet that you can get.
So there's a lesion on the neck, you're saying?
A big wart on the neck, yes. They're wondering what's the what recommendation would be for getting that removed.
I think this is really hard to do from a distance. I would have to see this wart.
So it'd be a good idea they work with their local veterinarian to address that.
I would say that, yes.
Okay. You talked a little bit about the mineral program having an effect on the susceptibility. I think we've got a question here that would ask you to expound on that a little bit more. Specifically, was that organic trace minerals versus non-organic? Was that the difference in those treatments?
So
and then if you were looking at implementing that, would that make a difference in your other management protocols, or would it be the same, but you may not have to use them much?
So the organic trace minerals that I tested during a field trial, controlled randomized double-blinded field trial, was a Zimpro product. And the idea behind that is that the increased zinc and iodine contents of that product actually strengthens the barrier that the skin represents between the environment and the cattle. And so I can only speak for what I tried out in that field trial. Again, zinc and iodine seem to have that extra effect in terms of concentration. We tried feed supplements provided by Nutritech. It's called Nutritech, so that's a Diamond V and Cargill product in dairy cattle, and found that we can actually significantly delay outbreaks of DD as well. And then the Diamond V product, the Nutritech product, would be, the idea behind that is that there's an immunomodulation by those yeast extracts that will lead to prevention of DD. And I have to say that these feed supplements are only a piece in the puzzle of what an integrated prevention and control program should represent. It's not a magic bullet. It's just an aid in delaying those outbreaks, together with managing your risk factors, your recording system, your detection system for the lesions, your foot bathing, your skills in hoof trimming. So this all kind of comes together. There are unfortunately no magic bullets to eliminate DD today that I'm aware of. Okay. And if somebody tries to sell you the magic bullet, I would be very critical about it. Okay, that's good advice.
And so we don't have any more questions in the chat at this time. So anybody who has joined us on the phone and has any questions they would like to ask, or if they need the BQA certification, unmute yourselves and ask your questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a great presentation. And I'm sorry too for all the glitches, but you recovered well and you stayed on time. You're great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra. And thank you in your team as well for all the support that I've had in preparing this.
So not hearing any questions, and I think I got everybody who wanted a CE into the chat box. I appreciate everybody who did that as well. And just to remind everybody of our upcoming program, I've been scrolling through these slides to remind you all that that's coming up. And if you want to hear about pasture weed management, to go ahead and get yourselves registered. Otherwise, if there's no more questions, we can you all can start jumping off and doing what else you need to do yet tonight, right? So thank you again, Dr. Doepfer.
My pleasure.